Warm welcome everybody to Strategic Competence for a Sustainable Future. Please meet Cecilia Widebeck-West, the Operations Director of Nordic, the Nordic Chapter of Climate Governance Board's Impact Forum. Cecilia?
Thank you. And I just want to say that the Board's Impact Forum, we work to engage board directors in the Nordics and internationally to accelerate climate action and innovation for sustainable business and a sustainable world. And let me tell you a little bit about board's impact in more detail later on. The agenda for today is, after this brief introduction, we will get some remarks on the leading in a fundamentally changing world. We will get some perspectives from board chair, NED and education. We'll have a brief poll and then a moderated discussion with also some questions where you are welcome to write your questions in the Q&A part of this webinar. And then after that, we will just conclude and tell you a little bit about what's happening going forward with Board's Impact. Please share on social media. Let's get going. Board's Impact Forum, we arrange webinars like this. We also have some partner events. We have a website where you can find a blog and information and discussions about previous webinars as well as future events. We do some surveys and research, and we have just started with some peer group exchanges for members. And what we do is all based on the climate governance principles developed by the World Economic Forum, although we apply the full sustainability scope on this. And now let me hand over to Liselotte Engstam, who's the chair of Board's Impact Forum.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and thank you for all spending an hour with us here today. We're super delighted to have Lise, Kingo, Mette, Morsing, and Arne Karlsson joining us today. Very experienced board members and sustainability leaders, not just in the Nordics, but for the world. We just wanted to let you know that you are coming, 54% of you are coming from the Nordics and 46% of you are coming from the rest of the world. Actually from 38 different countries, which is quite impressive. A warm welcome to everybody. Let's dive directly into this. I'm very happy to introduce Lise Kingo. Lise is an independent board director at Sanofi in France, at Covestro in Germany, and at Aker Horizons in Norway. She's the chair of the advisory board of Leonardo Center for Business in Society at Imperial College in London. And she's also an advisor to Novo Nordisk Foundation. Ms. Kingo is the former CEO of United Nations Global Compact. She's also the former executive vice president at Novo Nordisk in Denmark. Warm welcome, Lise. And you are on mute, Lise, so we need, thank you.
Thank you very much, Liselotte, and it's a great pleasure to be with you today to dive into a very important and interesting part of leading in a fundamentally changing world, which we are all part of. But today, the focus is on what competences are required, particularly at a board level, to make this succeed. So my task today is just to provide a bit of a framing before I hand over to my two excellent panelist colleagues in a moment. So if we look at my next slide, I just want to start by giving you a little bit of a backdrop on where we are in terms of sort of how our world is developing today. I come from the UN Global Compact, so the 10 principles and the 17 global goals I feel is a great framework for the discussion that we will be having today. And clearly, if you look at the status of where the world is after 6 years with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we have two major challenges. One of them is climate change. The other one is social inequalities that have definitely become even bigger after more than a year with the COVID pandemic. The International Panel on Climate Change from the UN have just issued their new report, providing a status of climate change in the world. And it is pretty dramatic reading, as I'm sure you have already picked up. So clearly the backdrop for how boards and companies need to work today is to integrate the challenges in the world, and of course, in particular, the climate change, which is becoming more and more actual and visible every day. If we look at my next slide, more than 50 years ago, Milton Friedman coined his very famous doctrine for business. The business of business is business. Now, 50 years later, I think it's fair to say that this is now history. And another way of saying it is that responsible business is good business. So the whole environment that companies are operating in today has become a much broader, we could say, a ESG environment. I think it's pretty clear from both the financial community, but also from many important CEOs across the world, that there is a mainstream understanding today that companies that are failing to meet societal expectations and investor expectations on environment, social, and government factors risk losing their access to the capital markets, but definitely also their license to operate. And as you can see from a study that was done in the UN Global Compact about a year ago, there's actually 88%, 90% of CEOs who feel that the global economic systems need to refocus on equitable growth in the world. So what does this mean for the way we are running businesses today? If we look at the next slide, this is an attempt to do an overview showing how it might be optimal to integrate ESG in businesses based on the very vast experience that an organization like the UN Global Compact has. And basically the idea is that sustainable business has now become a top strategic priority for most companies across the world. So this means that boards must also ensure full integration across the board, starting from the strategic level with the purpose, the governance, the corporate strategy, ensuring that ESG is properly integrated, then cascading these goals and priorities down into the operations, and finally, of course, making sure that all this is reported and included in all dialogue with stakeholders. But my key message is start at the strategic level, not at the communications level. We are also seeing the EU and other institutions grappling with new guidelines for what are expected from boards and executive level today. And I think it's fair to say that failing to consider ESG today may constitute a breach of directors' duties, and for AGM elected board members, I think it's something to consider very seriously. Some of the newest discussions in the area of how does a board ensure a solid focus on ESG, there are discussions across the world, maybe particularly in Europe and in the US, on how to anchor ESG in existing companies, in the company's governance setup, such as nominations, governance, audit for the data and the reporting, or whether to create a separate sustainability committee. But I think that is still very much sort of work in progress out there. And finally, if we look at the competences required to be a board member and be part of these kind of discussions in the board, I wanted to end by sharing a survey with you that the UN Global Compact did together with Russell Reynolds a little bit more than a year ago, looking into 4,000 role specifications for CEOs and for independent board members, looking at whether ESG competences was mentioned or required. And the result was a bit more than a year ago, that only 15% of the specifications made a reference to sustainability, and only in 4% of the instances, sustainability experience or mindset was an actual requirement. So in keeping up with Russell Reynolds around this, I'm happy to report that new surveys have been done and the number is now up at 16%. But still, what we want to discuss today is how can we ensure that we have the right competences to drive this sustainability transformation that is necessary at board level, but of course also throughout the company. And how is this being done at business schools, at universities, where the new leaders are being developed, and how is this seen by very experienced business people, as we will hear a little bit later in the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lise. And it's very interesting to see how our different perspectives merge now. And Lise is joining us from Italy, and we're super grateful for Mette for sharing her competences at 6 o'clock in the morning from New York today. So Mette is the professor and head of principles for responsible management education at UN Global Compact. She's also a board member at the Lego Foundation. She was the Mistra Chair of Sustainable Markets and the Executive Director of the Mistra Center for Sustainable Markets at Stockholm School of Economics. She has a long background as a professor at Copenhagen Business School, where she was the founder of CBS Center of Corporate Social Responsibility and has educated hundreds, if not thousands, of board members in this topic. She's also been a visiting professor at Royal Holloway, and she has been a member of the Danish Government's Council for Social Responsibility. Now, Mette, what is your perspective on the competencies needed by the boards, and what do you see in terms of building up the education to both in leadership terms and in board terms?
So thank you so much, Liselotte, for inviting me, for having me here today to discuss a very central topic, I would say at a global scale, for how we actually integrate sustainability, so not only into the classroom, but also into the boardroom. And let me start by mentioning three trends, you could say, or three sort of agenda points here today. First, I would reinforce, you could say, what Lise Kingo has already so well articulated here this morning or this afternoon about the new responsibilities for the board that we see today. Indeed, the ESG, environmental, social governance issues, has appeared in the boardroom, where we before saw these issues often delegated to the ethics office in the company. In the operations of the company, we now see these issues entering the boardroom. And I think it's fair to say that in many boards, these are still regarded a risk. Sustainability is still regarded a risk for how the company operates. For example, when we've seen Greenpeace some years ago were challenging Nestlé on its palm oil and deforestation in Asia, for example. This is indeed an issue that arrives directly into the boardroom. This is not only handled at operational level. So the question here is how such a risk at that point is sort of surprising a board, or to what extent the board has already, you could say, prepared itself for such strategic challenges. What we see today in the boardroom is also how ESG issues, sustainability issues, are not only regarded as a risk, but also a strategic opportunity. For example, in the case of Unilever, we see how the consumer preferences have changed over the past decade favorably towards sustainable products. This is, of course, also a concern for a board member to consider. And we can also see how many companies are regarded most preferred supplier if they have their sustainability issues in place. For example, in the gold mining industry, you can see how access to extracting without delays are much faster, much easier in cases where the sustainability issues, human rights issues have been considered carefully by the board. So these are opportunities as well as risks for a board to consider. So these are the new responsibilities that are not only handled at operational level, but definitely land directly in the boardroom. Second, I want to emphasize how a board sort of sets the tone from the top, you could say, that leading a culture of ethics and integrity does not only occur out of the ethics office or out of the CEO's directorship. Also, the tone from the board is leading and determining, monitoring the ESG policies and the long-term business impact towards sustainability. So this is very important how the board articulates, how the board sets that tone from the top for it to cascade down into the organization. And thirdly, but not leastly, I want to sort of emphasize the educational aspect here. And maybe I would more put this as a challenge or as a question for us to discuss a bit further. How those competences needed in the boardroom on sustainability is something we should leave at the discretion of the individual board member, whereas we used to rely on, you could say, informal personal integrity from board members to be aware of the ethical issues, to these new competences and responsibilities for boards. And that, I think it's a big question to what extent we should formalize, to what extent we should professionally educate board members to be aware of these new responsibilities, risks, and opportunities. For example, in the wake of the financial crisis, 2007-8, in Denmark, for example, it became compulsory for board members in the financial sector to go through a board leadership program where, of course, ethical issues and sustainability is part of such an education. And that is within the financial sector. And the question is, of course, whether board leadership should, with regards to sustainable development, should also be considered compulsory, perhaps even, and if we should think more about how that education is provided to board members into the future. Thank you very much, Liselotte.
Thank you so much, Mette, and so very interesting. And in some ways, you can say that the entire climate governance initiative and indeed Board's Impact Forum has really become the key area for us, and what we share in that. I think that we will now move over to our third panelist, and we're super grateful to have caught Arne on one of his moments in Sweden and not traveling around. And Arne is the chairman of Ecolin. He's also chairman of Einar Mattsson Roll Talk Limited and World Schindler's Prize Foundation. He is a non-executive board director at A.P. Møller-Mærsk, who actually announced yesterday, or maybe it was today, a very interesting thing. I hope you will mention that, at Eurovent Holding and at Swedish Securities Council. You're also an executive advisor, board member for the European Spallation Source. Now, you were the former chair of Swedish Corporate Governance Code, so you have made a lot of impact on many of the boards and boards operations, not just where you are, but also in terms of that guidance. You were previously CEO of Ratos, an investment company, and you've been a board member of private equity and industrial companies. So, of course, with your very broad experience, we're super excited to have you here, and also to listen to how do you see that the boards will have to take this in, and I know that you work in several of these super leading companies on the topic. Warm welcome, Arne.
Thank you. And I hope you will let me quote that with impact, etc. back home here, because nobody believes that here. So that would be very, very helpful. I would like to start with, in my experience, which is of course a narrow one global-wise, but still, I really don't know any company with self-respect or survival instinct that does not have the topics we're talking about here today, high or highest on the agenda, both in the management team and the board. And if not, I believe you have a big, big problem ahead of you. Either the board has a problem with the management team, or the owners with the board and the management team. And if you have it in all three parts, you probably have a company up for big problems going forward. Because of course, this is an extremely important issue we are discussing here, not only from a societal point of view, but also from a pure capitalistic point of view, a profit point of view. This is about the survival, not only for humanity, but actually for companies too, if this is not handled in a good way. And this is of course very good, because when industry, profits and society really needs to focus on the same thing, and thus I think that's the best way to actually achieve results. I would actually say that I totally agree with Lise that Milton Friedman is outdated with the interpretation of what was said at the time. But I can say that as the chair for the Swedish Corporate Governance Board up until this summer, our opening paragraph was before that companies should make as much money as possible for the shareholders. But then we changed that to a couple of years ago to the company should make as much money as possible for the shareholders, but to be able to do that, you have to be in reasonable good alliance with values and rules in society and among your customers, because otherwise someone will come and take the license to operate from you through rules, regulations, laws, and then you won't be able to make as much money as possible. So I think there is a modern version of this which is very well valid still. Now, to me, I think I would like to take this, I fully agree with what's been said so far, but I would take this down to a IRL level, so to speak, in that, to me, this is a topic which is business as usual from a strategic board point of view. Of course, the content can be difficult, can be important, but as with all other important topics in the board, you have to be good at production. You have to understand that from a board point of view, because without good production, you won't have any ESG to care about. You have to have a brand respect, because otherwise you won't produce, and then you won't have to care about ESG. If you don't care about ESG, you can skip production and brand, etc. So this is one, of course, very important. I don't take this lightly, but it's the other way around. If you take this seriously, is one board topic that to a large extent, again, on a strategic level, can be handled as business as usual. Just as when new materials arrive or digitalization popped up or whatever. So the board has to assess that this is handled in a good way in the company, assure to the owners that this is done. The board can inspire and knowledge share, of course, from other companies, but especially help the company focus on the important matters for the company. And the most, which I will repeat if I'm allowed to speak after this, and that is that this has to be embedded in the ordinary business. It shouldn't be a sidekick or tick the box exercise you do besides the ordinary business. And therefore, I find it very difficult to discuss board specialists, because as a board member, you are legally responsible for everything that happens in the board. But of course, if you are that kind of generalist and also a specialist in ESG, fine. But I find it difficult to discuss specialists in the board. I'm even less positive to the sustainability committees, which was discussed, because I can elaborate on that if someone wants later on. But I do believe that makes, again, it's something alien from the ordinary course of business, and then you will fail with integrate this into the business. I think that the governance tools and committees and whatever are already in place, which I can give real life examples of. And again, I'm not downplaying this. This is hugely important, survival of humanity in companies. And therefore, I think, first of all, I am a bit worried about all the technocrats, ivory tower theoreticians popping up, writing rules about something they don't know, one size fits all of that. I think that's a major problem. I even think it can prevent the dynamic development going on in business right now. The bold moves you alluded to, Liselotte, when we took the beginning of this week in Maersk, investing in ships, quite a big investment, which we will be able to run carbon neutral or free rather. That's a bold decision. It is on the board level. It's been treated in different committees before it ended up there. It will be treated in the other committee going forward to see that things are running in the way it should. But I'm not sure that we would have ended up there had authorities or politicians or others put straight jackets on us with a one-size-fits-all rule a couple of years ago. This has been an enormously dynamic process within Maersk. So I'm worried about that. And just a few words also. Of course, board members, individuals has to develop. You are responsible for everything, including this. You have to learn more. It's your own. You have a responsibility to develop yourself. But it's a lifelong learning, as in all occupation these days, I guess, to be a board worker. But of course, that can be strongly supported by companies. In a couple of companies I'm on, we have teach-in dinners before every board meeting, the evening before, where we deep dive into different topics which we need to learn more about and we don't have time for in the ordinary board meetings. We have seminars in some companies. We have new induction programs in some companies. Of course, the companies should support in that. In the management team, of course, you need specialist competences. You need to be very aware of this. And it was mentioned education, and there is where it all starts, of course. At the high schools and universities, you really need to get a full understanding of this, so people are prepared for this when they arrive into management teams and maybe boards later on. So this is very important, but I don't think one should complicate it too much when it comes to governance. This is something that can be handled within the ordinary course of business, and it should be, because again, I can give concrete examples of that, but it should be very integrated in what you do. Otherwise, you will neither fix the defense or take care of all the opportunities that are out there. I think I stopped there.
Thank you so much, Arne, and we will certainly come back to several of your topics. If I can get some help now by Cecilia and actually launch the survey, we will ask the question to the members. So if you can launch the survey. Thank you so much. So our questions to you in the audience today is, do you think your leaders have a sustainable mindset and a sustainable leadership attributes? And you can answer fully agree to fully disagree, or I don't know. And you would get the same question about your board specifically, if you think they have that. If you scroll down in that little window that popped up, we'll also like to know if you think that the board processes and structure that you have in place today drives a sustainability impacted strategy and vision, or if you think there needs to be some adjustment to that. Same types of answer. We'll keep that up for a short while, and then I'll go back and actually pick up on the question, how do you as a board learn more? And we heard some fantastic examples here from Arne on how you have pre-dinners on deep dive topics. And Lise, I wanted to hear, in what way do you see that boards learn about these topics?
Well, Liselotte, I think, it's always nice when you are embarking on something relatively new to compare it to something that is well known. And in many ways, I see a parallel between the entire digitalization issue that came up as a big, how should I say, challenge and opportunity for companies and of course for boards a number of years ago. And of course, a lot of learning and sharing, as Arne was alluding to, happened in the whole digital space to make sure that everybody developed a common mindset and could have, an informed debate at a board level around digitalization. And I think the next topic is just ESG or sustainable business or whatever we would like to call it. And I think there are many things to learn from how digitalization was introduced at board level that we can also use now when it comes to ESG. And I want to pick up on another point Arne made, which is that I don't think we are looking for specialists at a board level, either on digitalization or on ESG. But we are looking for people that have a reasonable understanding of what it is and are able to translate it into business strategy. So I also agree that this topic, ESG, should not be seen as more complicated or more strange than any other issue that is coming to the board. I mean, to me, digitalization is pretty complicated, but you learn that bit by bit. And I think in the study that I alluded to that Russell Reynolds was doing was a little bit different, because that was analyzing the documents that companies are putting together when they go to search for a CEO or for an NED. And I think it's just good news that it's becoming more and more mainstream, that just as digitalization is, a capability companies are looking for, so is ESG.
Super, thanks, Lise, and very interesting. And I do agree. We're going to come back to this digital topic, I think, in many ways. Mette, I just wanted to hear also your perspective. How do you see that schools and training institutes and associations are preparing themselves to actually help a bit on this topic?
Yes, no, thank you, Liselotte, for this important question, because I think we're simply not doing enough. We're not doing this good enough, well enough, extensively enough. We're not taking this as an urgent issue at a high level, I would say. If I look into the business school curriculum, the leadership curriculum of today, it is still very, very chapter 1 in any strategy book will look upon, you could say, shareholder value as the predominant way of educating youth. I was part of an analysis 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago actually, where we were looking into the financial sector and the level at which the financial sector, financial professionals are educated in ESG. And it was, I wouldn't maybe say surprisingly, but it was alarmingly low level of education in the financial sector, professionals of ESG issues. And we can, of course, look upon ourselves, blame ourselves as educators in the world, educators of finance professionals. We're simply not doing this good enough. So I think that there is I can see, fortunately, that there is a movement now. I can see we have, for example, in PRIME, Principles for Responsible Management Education, we've just launched a new working group on sustainable finance, led by professors of finance at Kellogg School of Management. And here we have a group of almost 300 finance professors who are meeting on an annual basis, and of course in between, to discuss how do we get ESG into the finance curriculum. And I think that is very important. And I agree with Lise and Arne, this should not be too complex. But still, again, there are different issues that has to do with the ESGs, then has to do with, you could say, more traditional finance curriculum. So there are other kinds of risks, other kinds of opportunities that the finance professional must be alerted to and must learn also how to make decisions that are leaning towards a more green, towards a more social profile. And here education matters. And I would say exactly the same goes for other issues, for example, business and human rights. These are also difficult social issues to account for. And I could see in the chat, there was a question about how do we measure all of this? And I think in particular in human rights, it's very difficult to account for, to measure in quantitative terms. At the same time, we are seeing the EU Commission coming up with new regulatory framework on business and human rights. So we also need those competences into the boardroom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think there's so many things that we need to learn from and do. I wanted to bring back the survey results, if you can help us share that. Okay, let's see. We think that 61% partly agrees. We still have something to improve on, but not too bad. And basically almost the same on the board level. 56% partly agree, 23% fully agree. I think it's similar numbers between the boards and the leaders. And on the board structure, it's actually also partly agree. So it means that the participants here think we have still some work to do, but we are at least started with some of the competence areas and some of the structures that we need to work with. Arne, can you comment on two things? Both hear the poll, if it was something that informed you or surprised you, or also comment on this thing, how do you get it integrated for the board? what is the best way to start?
Well, the first question, surprise, no. I was happy to see that this was the case. Obviously, still things to do, but because you should be fully agree, you should have all important issues for a board, and we weren't here in this, but that's good. Then you have something to do as a board member to make sure that this happens. And of course, we cannot, because this is a moving target. I mean, in many companies I work, what has happened in the last few years have been surprisingly fast and surprisingly strong, etc. The new UN report and all that. So this is partly a moving target which you have to adapt to also in the companies, of course. Then get it in. Well, first of all, at the strategy day, if you're on a board where you haven't had this as a major topic at one of the strategy days, then I would recommend that warmly. And if you have it in the plan for next year, make sure you have and I'm talking out of own experience in companies where I'm chairman, we had at every board meeting a shorter half hour, 45 minutes, let's call it teaching on the agenda ahead of the strategy board meeting, so we didn't start from zero. So we could really have a strategic discussion at that point in time. And when it's there, as with digitalization, I fully agree with that, what you said, Lisa, there. Then it will be part of the agenda, and you will have follow-ups, etc. It's very difficult to say. I mean, if you take Maersk, and then if you compare it to Haglöfs, some of you might wear Haglöfs clothes or so. I was chairman of a big number of years for Haglöfs. Already in the early 90s, we had a Korean employee traveling around to all our sub-suppliers in Vietnam and other places, making sure they didn't have tied up children in the factories, etc. Also at the second level. I mean, this is 20, 30 years ago, so this is nothing new, and this has developed. Of course, later we started to make clothes out of recycled material, Gore-Tex material, and so forth. I mean, so this is not new, and it's a development process. So therefore, it's a bit different. But I think the key, if I would give one answer, I have one company where we have one of the best sustainability officers I've seen, but she's not running this as a sideshow again. She is sitting there, and she's competent enough to sit down with the R&D department, discussing chemistry, which is involved in this case. It's plastic, a part of this, about circularity later on, what floats in the water in recycling. Recycling factories. She's part of the R&D development. She discusses with production. She discusses, and she's reporting. And I think that's extremely important. So again, she's not a sidekick. She's a member of the ELT, executive leadership team. But she's also reporting directly to the CEO. So if you run over her as a director of production, and you can, of course, if you think she's wrong. But then you have to answer to the CEO. And that is also to give this really, you talked about the tone from the top earlier here, and this goes from the board too, of course. I have one meeting a year in this particular company with this person, yes, besides from learning myself, of course, but yes, so everyone knows. The board, the chairman, is part of this, and you have to give it respect, and you have to integrate it, and then we are making business out of this. We are stealing customers from competitors that have not handled this in the same way, and plastic is of course a sensitive area. We are extremely highly ranked by the independent EcoVadis and things like that, or companies like that. So well, I think
but I think it's super good that you actually drive this all the way into the strategy, but also that you're making money out of this. I mean, it's you're doing it in a way that it's strategically meaningful for the business. So it's not just about transition. Of course, there are industries with a bit bigger challenges, but some of your industries that you work in also have that. I wanted to ask, Lise and Mette to also just comment very quickly on the poll, and also how do you think it's best to get started? What is it that you should bring in? And then after that, Cecilia, I'd like to bring up some questions from the audience. So do you want to start, Lise?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, I fear I'm beginning to repeat myself and also what was just said, because I think, the simple formula is to start at the strategic level. And let's just imagine that there's a company out there that has never thought about this topic and want to start, completely new and fresh. I think the way to go is to start looking at the purpose of the company, the values of the company, making sure that, how should I say, the ESG thinking is reflected right there. Maybe even in the articles of association, which I recall that Novo Nordisk was one of the first companies to actually put sustainability in there many years ago, and it sent a very strong signal. And then I think from there, ensuring that it's also part of the company's governance. It's on the agenda in the board. It's integrated into the work of the board, into top management. At the AGM, for example, of course, ESG is part of what is being put forward.
Right.
And then I think ensuring that when the corporate strategy is being developed, in many companies, this is a 5-year, maybe even 10-year document. I mean, ensuring that some of the trends we have been talking about today, things are moving extremely quickly when it comes to climate change, when it comes to social inequalities, and how it can actually translate into both business challenges and business opportunities. Make sure to include that and develop a solid, balanced business scorecard that has goals also for the ESG integration. So the goals for developing a new product, launching another one, having a certain return on investment, there are also very specific goals relating to ESG issues. And then I think from there, it's actually much more simple to cascade it down the organization, ensuring that it's fully embedded into the R&D agenda, into the production agenda, also into the HR agenda, how people are remunerated, how people are trained, and also into corporate finance, which is what Mette mentioned. I think it's a great project Global Compact is running to gather CFOs and discuss a little bit more in detail, what is the role of the CFO and corporate finance when it comes to ESG? How is the company investing when a new plant is being built somewhere else in the world? Is the company considering the kind of energy that should be applied, the kind of standards for employees? So I really think that this is the formula and the way that key strategic elements are normally anchored in a business.
Right. Thank you so much. Mette, if you hold on, I'm just going to see if we have a question coming up and we can hold that together. Cecilia, do we have a question?
Yes. We have several questions, but one of them is about the long-term impact on corporations, which goes beyond the direct stakeholders and towards society at large, and even the future society, and what changes in perspective and competences are necessary to address those long-term impacts on others than the traditional stakeholders.
Right. And maybe, Mette, if you kind of both pick that up, and maybe something on the poll as well.
Yes, no, thank you so much. And exactly to that great question, I think that this is something, of course, we continuously discuss with our students, but also what we hear the students themselves asking for today, which I think is very important, even into the boardroom, the talent recruitment, you could say. That is, how do we put society at the center much more than what we used to do? How do we integrate a kind of what is often referred to as system thinking, that you as a student and as a future leader understand that, of course, you need to understand the operations of how you lead, how you drive an organization, a business, but you also need to understand how that business is embedded in society and how you cannot think of changing the world alone, but that you do this in partnership with others, so that you are also embedded in a society which Arne very well put before, that's a moving target, sustainability is. So how do you make sure that our students are aware of political regulatory frameworks changing, new trends in the NGO world, new challenges for the planet, you could say, but also for people, planet in terms of climate change, people in terms of human rights issues. We've recently seen a lot of inequality in many ways, new race on these issues. So how do you, as a student, learn to navigate in a complex world where systems thinking is needed? Another thing that our students are very much asking for is the definition of what does success look like. And if we look upon our textbooks today, success is very much still, I'm sad to say, very much focused on success for the shareholders. The more profit, the better. And we need to have a kind of a discussion and a redefinition of what success looks like for our students in a much more broad sense. If you look, I was reading a fun analysis the other day about the language in, for example, strategy textbooks for our students is very much what someone referred to as a warfare language. It's about fight back, defend, attack, win the battle, capture, 5 forces driving industry competition. And it doesn't have that language of collaboration. We're doing this together, partnerships, etc. We can see that there is a change in that vocabulary. And I really think it matters a lot how we speak about, how we frame the way that we want our students to think about the role of business in society.
I think it's super interesting. I wanted to ask Arne here, because you have found a way in many of your companies and also in your previous role to find this balance with actually knowing that profit comes from doing the right thing. So how have you discussed around that in your boards to find that balance?
Well, I actually think it's very difficult in real life, in companies. Politicians sets and should set the rules, and within those rules, the companies work. And then, of course, I think an even more important force in this, that is actually customers or individuals. Actually, as it happens to be, even this very weekend, one of my grandchild, she's 6 years old, she asked, "Granddad, are you bad for environment?" If I try to translate it.
Wow.
I'm trying to chase down whoever talked to her. But anyway, this consciousness and of course Greta Thunberg. I mean, this is the most important force in changing this. Then in an individual company where, I mean, Maersk, we are where we are, we produce, we try to adapt, it will take time, but it's very difficult to take this big picture, the origin of the question, which is of course extremely important on a global level and political level and so forth. But you in an individual company, you can only, of course, affect piecemeal of this. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it differs. Again, if it's Maersk, if it's a leisure company, if it's it differs so much. It's difficult to have one answer.
So I wanted you, because we're getting towards the end, I wanted you to spend time on some of the, recommendations, practical things that you have found valuable And where do you find your source of information and inspiration to continue to drive this? You're all three super engaged. You're making high impact. What's your inspiration and what do you recommend for others? Who wants to start? Lise.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, now we get down to the real fundamentals. And I have to say that, you know, the inspiration for me in working with business and sustainability for more than 30 years has actually always been this statement that Gro Harlem Brundtland made many years ago, saying that sustainability is all about handing over the planet in a better state to our children than we received it from our parents. And I have a son, and of course that gives a completely different dimension, because I feel responsibility that I utilize my platforms to contribute to handing over the planet in a better state. And I have to say, I'm a little bit worried these days, or significantly worried, when you read the new IPCC report. So I think we have to be honest and recognize that the way
okay, I think we had
been developing
we had a bit of
successful in many ways.
Yeah.
But we really need to change a number of habits. And I think listening to the young generation is definitely a huge inspiration for me. And I get very happy when I see the enthusiasm and the great ideas the young people have. So we have to begin to prepare to hand over.
Thank you.
To the next generation.
Thank you, Lise. Thank you so much. Mette, what is your recommendation to boards and board members, and what source of inspiration and information do you find?
Yes, no, thank you. I would just follow up on exactly what Lise said. Youth, the students, in my case, is a huge source of inspiration. And I'm fortunate enough to, on a daily basis, be working with students, with our students. And with that, you could say critical but constructive voice that comes out of youth. Willing, they are impatient. They are also willing to rediscuss the privileges that my generation has, to rediscuss and perhaps even redefine the necessity of these privileges and how they could maybe look different for the next generation, which I think is a very positive thing. So I have a lot of inspiration and a lot of hope for our students, for youth.
Thank you so much. And Arne, what is your recommendation to fellow chairmen and board members to engage in this?
Well, first of all, my inspiration, I've only had one personal saying, which I steal all my good ideas, of course, and that was Melker in Saltkråkan, Astrid Lindgren's book, and it's This Day Alive, and to do good every day. And actually, you are able to do that today, in my case, in companies, and that's very encouraging, because it's much more fun to do profitable good things than otherwise. And then, well, there are so many sources. I understand, of course, I need to say Board Impact Forum is one very important source, and it is. But I mean, there are so much in media. You find reports. I have actually read the last UN report. I'm on 10 boards, 2 non-profits, but we are working with these issues, at least in one of them too. And so I have to work with this, and that's inspirational, and I think that should go for board members too. This is lifelong learning, and in a moving target. I'm, from a purely egoistic point of view, I'm extremely glad, of course not what's happening in the world, but that this issue is there, because in my age, to be confronted with something totally new where you can't rest on what you learned earlier, that is very, very inspirational, especially as if you succeed, you as an American rock band once said, I may not change the world, but I'm going to leave a scar. And I think that's a good target for a company.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I know we probably have a couple of questions still left. And we'll see if we can get them responded to in other ways. I wanted to thank you very much and hand over to the final thanks and information to Cecilia.
Thank you. And a great thank you to our presenters, to Lise, to Mette, to Arne, and of course also to Liselotte for moderating this discussion. I also would like to thank the audience and the people that, because you have been very active, and that's a great response, I think. Also want to thank everybody else who works on Boards Impact Forum, because we all do this together, trying to get even more engagement and inspiration. And we are working voluntarily and are supported by sponsorships and grants. And therefore, I also want to thank our partners, FCG, DLA Piper, Prime Webber Shandwick, the Swedish Academy of Board Directors, Board Network in Denmark, Boardman in Finland, Scandinavian Executive Institute, and the Directors Institute in Finland. And I just want to let you know that if you sign up as a member for Boards Impact Forum, you will get a chance to join our new peer-to-peer exchanges that we are going to start with shortly. And on 20th September, we will have a new webinar with owner perspectives, stewardship and collaboration with boards on sustainability and climate change. And I think it would also be a very inspiring webinar. So I think based on that, I will thank everyone and for joining and for taking the time. See you next time.